Welcome everybody to Word on the Street. We're thrilled to be able to offer it this year. So at this moment, we are Word on the Street, and it's called Powwow, a celebration through song and dance by Karen Pheasant Neganawani. Before I start, I'd like to welcome Karen. I'd also like to do a land acknowledgement. And I'd like to acknowledge that Lethbridge Public Library acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pay respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The city of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We're also pleased to have ASL interpreter as well in this session. So thank you. I wanted to just let everybody know how the next 45 minutes will run, and that will introduce Karen. We have questions. I have questions for Karen, and we will roll along. Karen will read from her book as well. We will take question and answer. We have time set aside for that. So, and we will wrap it up about 12:45. So with that, I'd like to just introduce Karen. Karen is an Anishinaabe dancer, educator, writer, artist, and orator from Wickwam. You might have to help me, Karen. On Manitou, she's from Manitoulin Island, Ontario. Her grandparents, maternal and paternal, come from Wickwam. Again, Karen will correct me. Her parents are residential school survivors. Karen is a PhD candidate in Educational Policy Studies, Indigenous Peoples Education at the University of Alberta, and is an assistant professor at Mount Royal University on the Treaty 7 region. She is cross-appointed to the Department of General Education, Office of Teaching and Learning, and the Department of Humanities, Indigenous Studies. And Karen lives, actually, I don't think this is true anymore, Karen. She lived in Little Current, Ontario, but I believe she's in Edmonton now, in Alberta. And Karen and I had the opportunity to meet earlier this week, and she told me that she's very honored to be a part of this WOTS presentation, and that Karen does have roots in Lethbridge and Treaty 7. And so we're so pleased that you're here, Karen. And I wondered if you just wanted to start us off with a little bit about yourself, and if you could give me the correct pronunciation of where you came from here in Canada.
Miigwech, bonjour, ani, okay. Greetings to each and every one of you that are here. I feel really awkward in not being able to be accessible. And so I'm going to share a quick story first, and then I'm going to log off and reboot. So while you were talking, I closed all my programs I had open, and then I'm going to reboot. So the quick story that I'm going to have, that I'm going to sit with you is, so I don't know who I have, and maybe while I'm rebooting, if you could respond in the chat room, I'd like to get a sense of, do I have teachers here? Do I have parents? Do I have readers here? Do I have parents with their children? Do I have fellow librarians here on this website? I want you to put it in the chat room, respond, and then feedback to Jenny, and she'll keep track of that. And then when I come back online, she can let me know who the audience is. Part of the reason is when I share my stories, I want to know who the audience is, and part of my struggle, it took me quite some time to write this book, and part of it is, who am I speaking to? Who's going to read? And to be honest with you, although it's labeled and categorized as a children's book, I never wrote it for merely a children's audience. I wrote it, I have two grandchildren who today are 18 and 20, and all of them are avid readers of my 8 grandchildren. And so by the time my grandson was 9 or 10, he was already reading chapter books. So um, the publisher's kind of predicament with me was they had to keep reminding me that this is not an academic piece. It's a children's book, and so we arm wrestled that for the whole 3 years I was writing this. But so today, one of the hats that I wear is I'm an academic. I'm a university professor, besides being a jingle dress dancer, which, by the way, is Anishinaabe. And so I'm not going to say the correct pronunciation of those words that Jenny attempted to express, but I will say this: in my first year of university, a common term in the university is epistemology. And I don't know how many syllables. I stopped trying to figure out how many syllables is it in epistemology. And I will say it took me almost 2 years to learn how to say it. It took me another year how to use it in a paragraph, and a bit more time how to use it in a sentence. But I did. So what I'm saying is, regardless of how long it takes one to learn, that is the language. I speak one of the languages of this country, of this land. I'm Anishinaabe, and even though Anishinaabe are from the east, we did a migration all the way to Alberta here, where uh, just to the west of us here in Edmonton. So I'm going to sit with you while Jenny's counting the responses, and I'm going to log out and then log back in.
Karen, I wondered, shall I read out the strawberry drink recipe while we're waiting as well?
Okay. All right.
Okay. So yeah, Karen just did have some technical difficulties on her end. So thank you everybody for your patience. We are just going to, in her book, Karen, I read it, and you can see all the sticky notes. There's so many beautiful and important and things in the book, but the one thing that she included were recipes. And so while we're waiting for Karen, I wanted to just read out this strawberry drink recipe. I had the opportunity to read the book Braiding Sweetgrass in a book club with Linda Weaselhead. And I know, Linda, you're on the call. And I did come to learn that strawberries are an important they are a symbol in Indigenous tradition. And so when I saw this recipe, I'd like to try it, but I thought, well, we're waiting for Karen. I will read the strawberry drink recipe. If you have pen and paper, you can write it out. So here it reads, strawberry drink. Strawberries are important as food and medicine for many Indigenous peoples and are often available during summer powwows, and this makes 4 servings. So the ingredients that you need are 1 pint of strawberries, 4 cups of cold water, and then a sweetener, which could be maple syrup, honey, or sugar to taste. The directions are, number 1, wash the strawberries, put them in a large bowl, and mash them with a potato masher or a fork. Number 2, add the water and mix. Number 3, taste. If you think it should be a little sweeter, add a tablespoon of sweetener and taste again. Add and taste until it's sweet enough for you. And then number 4, the best part, is use a ladle to spoon the drink into glasses. And it sounds delicious. So I hope we all have a chance. And Linda Weaselhead, thanks for your comment. You have met Karen, so that is pretty awesome. And you have a sister, Paula, who is also a jingle dancer. And then we'll let Karen know that is a pre-K and a grade 2 child with her father. Anybody else, just so Karen knows who's in the audience? And we will, I might just read a bit, a final word from the author. I'll just read a bit while we're waiting for Karen. A final word from the author. I said in the introduction that when I was a child attending the powwow on my home reserve, just watching the powwow dance made me feel beautiful and powerful, and made me feel beautiful and powerful. When the men sang around the drums, I could feel the power and energy move throughout my body. It felt like a blessing. Today I'm grateful. The drum songs still make me feel beautiful. To me as a child, summertime was dance time. To me as a grandma, summertime is still dance. Dance time is being with family, my grandchildren, and friends. As an educator working with urban Indigenous students, I have come to understand that many Indigenous people still do not have the connection with family and community that is their birthright, whether because of Indian residential schools or the 60s scoops in Canada or other colonization policies in both Canada and the United States. The child welfare system of Canada continues to take Indigenous children away from their families, community, and cultural places. And for many of those who have had their identities taken away or, through no fault of their own, have not been able to know their culture, powwow culture serves as a stepping stone to the reclaiming of their Indigenous identity. I read another passage about her father, and the one thing I really liked uh, when Karen and I first met on Zoom, the first thing she asked me was, "Did you read my book?" And I said, "Well, I've looked through it," and and she said, "Many people will say it's lovely, and it is. The pictures are lovely, and many of the images are of Karen herself and her family." And the beadwork and the regalia and the just in general the regalia, the art that goes into them are amazing. But what I really liked is that there was kind of the as Karen mentioned, the history, the trauma, the terrible history, but that she took that history and blended it kind of with her family history and sort of had the two run parallel. And so, as Karen would say, I think it's a book of healing, and that powwows are a way of doing of bringing that about. So she does have a section here on my father's story. So my father was born in 1926 and was his mother's youngest baby when he was about 5 or 6 years old. Before he was taken away to Indian residential school, he went with his mother to the back of the field, far away from any prying Indian agents. He remembered seeing the big drum set up in the middle of the grassy field and a few well-respected men from the community who sang and hosted the proceedings. My mother said my father said his mother wore a shawl around her shoulders, but not a shawl like you see now at powwows. There were no flashy colors, just a simple little shawl over her shoulders. She would stand on one spot, dancing up and down, and his eyes glistened as his voice off in reflection. When my dad told me this, I was dancing full time and teaching dance in different communities across Canada. He recognized the changes that had taken place between his childhood and contemporary powwows. He didn't quite understand the rise in popularity of the public powwow shows. He only knew the spiritual practice of the drum and dance, something that he was raised to keep silent about in order to keep them alive when they were banned. But he recognized that other ways were needed to keep cultural practices alive, even if in a less solemn way. And so I think we'll find out when Karen comes back, but it's kind of keeping that alive. And the one question I wanted to ask her is just keeping, what do you share, and how do you trust that what you share will be taken in a healing way? And we're still waiting for, well, that means I get to read more. We're still waiting for Karen. I hope all her tech is working. I think maybe now we'll start at the beginning. Introduction. Let's do this backwards. When I was a little girl, my family spent the summer holidays at my grandparents' home in Northern Ontario. They lived on a farm, on a First Nation community on Manitoulin Island, far from the city where we lived. The farm was on a reserve. My cousins, aunties, and uncles lived there too. Because both of my parents had been sent to an Indian residential school, both of my parents have been sent to an Indian residential school, so they knew the hardships and traumas caused by it. They thought we would get a better education if we left the reserve, so we went to public school. We were the first generation to live away from our home reserve. My cousins on the reserve had to chop wood for the wood stove to keep their home warm and haul pails of water in order to bathe. In our home in Toronto, Ontario, besides being able to flip a switch to get heat or turn on a tap to get running water, we also had a television. Television or Saturday morning cartoons made us laugh, but when the cowboy and Indian movies came on, I felt sad. The TV Indians did not look or talk anything like my relatives on the reserve. My grandma did not know how to speak English. My cousin spoke another language most of the time, not English. The Hollywood version of Indians also caused a lot of teasing and bullying by other kids in our city neighborhood. Life as a lone Indian, in quotes she has, family in the neighborhood was painful. The good thing about television was that it gave me a window into dance. When I watched Hollywood dance musicals, I could leave my troubled reality and escape to another place. The most famous dancing couple at the time was Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They would float across the floor, their graceful, fluid movement holding me in awe and taking me to a magical place. In the privacy of my bedroom, I would imitate their dance and try to find that enchanted space for myself. Then I would swirl and twirl and down the narrow hallway. No matter how engaging their dips and swirls were, though, their dance was worlds apart from what I knew. As soon as school was finished in June, we would start to get ready for the day-long drive north. The excitement of being home with my grandparents and other relatives would keep me awake at night before we left. There was also my grandma's soup and homemade pies to look forward to, and there was the powwow. I think Karen is still having difficulty. She's trying to log on, so I'm just going to keep reading. Enjoy. Hearing the drums and the power of the songs at the powwow and being with so many other First Nations people was incredibly exciting. I urged my mom and auntie to make me a powwow dress so I could dance too. It was as if once we put on our Indian clothes, a power took over us on the dance floor. The closer I moved to the dancing spirit, the lighter my feet would become. When I was little, I would get lost among the dancers, hiding from the tourists who were watching. But as I began to feel the dance spirit, I would forget all about the tourists. Those joyful dance moments were breathtaking. They were also an escape from the harsh realities of being Indigenous in the city where we lived. It wasn't dance, as I had experienced it watching Fred and Ginger from afar on the television screen. It was a time of celebration and acceptance of identity, if only for a moment. Even after everything they had been through at Indian residential school, my mom and dad still had instilled in us a pride in being Indigenous, in being Anishinaabe.
Greetings.
Hi.
Thank you so much,
Karen.
Jenny.
Well, thank you.
My deepest apologies, but I rebooted it, so now the camera is working.
Super.
Let's see if I can move it a bit. Yep, there we go. I moved it a bit.
Thanks.
So I'm going to start from the beginning. I appreciate everybody. It looks like nobody logged off. You stayed on. So, miigwech for that. Thank you for that. Part of what I'm going to speak about today, Jenny, and as she mentioned, we had a visit earlier this week. And so we discussed, and she sent me some questions, and I looked at the questions this morning. And then, so I'm just going to roll right along because technically we just have 20, 25 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, I'd been writing for one of the questions Jenny asked me was what made me write or what directed me to write or whatever. Um, I had been writing. I teach. Um, I taught at the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Education, Alberta Education, an Aboriginal education focused course. But over now the past few years, I'm at in Calgary at Mount Royal. I teach between humanities and a liberal arts program in general education. So a lot of stuff has happened in the last couple of years with the many people aren't aware, but the TRC report came out, the Truth and Reconciliation report. And that was in 2015. And then last summer was the Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter. And then this summer was the unfortunate realization that the world, something we knew about, but the world just found out about the unnamed graves, mass graves in all of the school system. Cindy Blackstock, who does a lot of work in child services, she states that we now have more children in care than we had in residential school. And it wasn't until I moved to Alberta from Ontario when I realized the extent of the atrocities that colonial policies. So, Jenny, I was going to quickly ask you, so who was in our audience who responded? Who do I mostly have
Uh,
here?
you mostly have adults. You have Linda Weaselhead is here, and you know her sister-in-law Paula, who is also a jingle dancer. I've got teacher, a retired nurse. Teresa works here at the library, and then there's a pre-K and a grade 2 child with their father.
Okay, so I have a large genre of people.
Yeah, you
So,
do. Yeah.
okay, so some things I might talk about um, might sound like unapplicable, but it's the best way that I know. So when I say that I moved to Alberta, and even though I moved here, I've been around Alberta since 1984. Lived in on the Blood Reserve, then into Lethbridge, and then I went back east, and then I spent many summers working at the Banff School of Fine Arts, and then 10 years I moved back to Alberta. Uh, was I'm in Edmonton right now, but I work out of Calgary. So last year I was living in Calgary. So I've lived in Lethbridge, Calgary, and Edmonton. So kind of a very mixed background of what Alberta is, and then on reserve and off reserve. So when I moved here, the atrocities of the social economic situations of First Nations people, and most times I speak about First Nations as opposed to, quote, Aboriginal people. I, for one, never identify myself as an Aboriginal person, and I'm sure Linda would say the same. She's a Niitsitapi, she's of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I'm Anishinaabe, which is of the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. Um, the atrocity that I realized, besides one is most people my generation, and I'm over 60 years old, most people, First Nations on the prairie provinces, all went to residential school. And that's the reality. I'm a firstborn of both my parents who went to residential school. And um, I didn't realize there was a lot of something what we call socialized or things taught to be normal, just like how Canadians in general, I want to say it's in the past, but it's not. There's a stereotype that Canadian society has of us as drunk, stupid, lazy Indians. And I guess one of the reasons when you say what motivated me to write this book is because there's a huge part of society that's what they think of us as. And so on the second page, as you were reading out, you know, my parents, because of residential school, wanted to make sure that I could speak English, wanted to make sure I had a better education, wanted to make sure I had a better life. So I went to public school. I grew up in a city, and fortunately, through the strong will of my late dad, he made sure we always went home. We always went home to our land. We always went home to our Nokomis, Nasmishomis, our grandparents, our relatives. We ate our food. We heard our language. And so even though I was raised in a city, I always was I was going to say gifted. And that shouldn't be a gift. It should be a given. It should be a part of our life of just being home. So when I moved out to Alberta, I realized I have a story that I share often. I was at Prince Charles School, which was a program started in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was a program where several women who were had married off reserve and lost their rights to go back home. So they started this school in town in Edmonton. And Jenny Marquette's, Lillian Shirt, um, oh my goodness, I should know their names, but so several women, and it was a school that they wanted their children to be taught from an Indigenous, from a Naok, it was Cree, predominantly Cree and Métis framework. So I ended up at that school 10 years ago, and I came to realize that so this is what is new. If you look at the residential schools that are in Canada, there's a high density of them here in the prairie provinces. That's one. Two, um, as some of you know, the last one closed in 1996. In 1996, whereas in the East, they had closed at least in the 70s sometime. They had already closed. So people of my generation didn't go to residential school out East, whereas over here they did. They did. So that was one I realized is the high number of residential school survivors who are current here in the prairie provinces. And two, the amount of children that went to that were in the part of the 60s scoop. So I want you to write that down. Teachers, educators, social workers, the 60s scoop. I get kind of surprised that there's still people that don't realize what that is. So what that is, basically, there was government policies, there was police, there was childcare services where their only role and function was to scoop us up, to take the children away. And so they were farmed out. And I mean that literally farmed out. In some places, I have 60 Scoop colleagues, friends who will say they had a great life. But there are some, and it's more of the some than is the norm, um, who basically became farm hands. They were just adopted so they would be farm slaves. And so one day I was at this school here in Edmonton, and I seen one of the Gokums, one of the grandmothers, and we had her granddaughter in our school, a grade 5 student, and I asked the Gokum, oh, because one of the first questions we ask Nishnabek that we ask one another is, where are you from? Because then it tells a whole
Mhm.
history, and then like Linda, her I knew her mom really well. I used to dance with her mom all the time. I knew I didn't know her children like Linda and Paula, but I knew their mom. And so right away when I hear the name Weaselhead, I have a whole background of history and everything that situates and presents the positionality of that family. And likewise, if you knew the East, then you know, which by the way is Niganegune, that's my last name. So the thing with English is they separate the consonant and the vowel differently than the way it's said in indigenous languages. So it's Niganegune. So take a year to learn how to say that, as it took me a year to say epistemology. So, and I come from Wikwemikong, which is Wikwemikong. And so take another year to learn to say Wikwemikong. There are approximately 640 reserves in all of Canada, the largest reserve being right next door, the Blood Reserve. And Wikwemikong is the fourth largest reserve land base and population base. We have approximately 6 to 8,000 people on and off reserve, and maybe an on reserve population of 6,000. So we're very big, and we have a lot of people that have done amazing things. NHL, Chris Simon, Daphne Ojic in the arts. The provincial judge here in the province of Alberta was Tony Mendaman. The Bill C-31 went to the Supreme Court of Canada by Jeanette Corbière-Laval. All of these individuals come from Wikwemikong. So it's a those of you that teach history, librarians, you should know the word, the name, the community of Wikwemikong, because so much of history has come. And I'm going to take a moment to wave my banner, pat myself on the back, because we don't do enough of that, especially as Nishnabek, as Indigenous people. I'm very excited. I'm very honored that the book was announced this week. We spoke about that. The Emily Fleck Award, which is noted for the research and its contribution to Canadian society. So I'm so very excited about that. So they announced I made it one of the top finalists. So the very fact that an Indigenous person could make recognition, so it's of all Canadians. So I'm very happy and excited. So maybe you could have a watch party at the library or something on October 29th and say, she was here. So the two things I noticed about Alberta was, one, the high amount of residential school survivors, and two, the amount of people in also going back to, I asked the Skokom, where are you from? She says to me, Edmonton. Well, as a First Nations person, we never identify with the city that we're from. We identify with the community that we're from. So then she said Edmonton. So I said, no, I meant, where are you from? So I asked her a second time. She says to me, her voice a bit louder, Edmonton. And I'm like, I pause and I'm like, how come she's not, there's no reserve? Like, she's either, there's several reserves around Edmonton. There's Nakota Reserve, there's Cree, and Musqueam, Paul Ban, Alexis. So third time I asked her, no, I meant like, where are you from? So then she just, under her breath, she just mutters, I'm a 60 scoop. I just felt shattered when because she drooped her head down and she said, I'm a 60 scoop. And I just, everything just washed over me. And I realized, you have to realize that when somebody says that, they have lost every part of their culture. Some have no clue what reserve, what nation, their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents, their cousins, and everything. They have, and so moving to, and then I taught a powwow class at the local Indian center, and it was predominantly foster parents or parents who had adopted um, First Nations children, and they were trying to find a way for for these children to grasp onto their culture. And so that was my enlightening my enlightenment when I came to Alberta. But prior to Alberta, for 10 years prior, I had already been writing a lot about culture powwow, because powwow is almost a North American universal activity, language, event, cultural practice. Even though, as in chapter 4, it talks about the nuances and differences between different nations, there is some universityality of powwow culture. There's a drum with drummers around it, dancers. There's some specific categories that is done, whether you're California, Seminole Tribe powwow, or Halifax, or Kamloops, or Calgary Stampede, or Quemicong. There's some. So in all of the atrocities that happens to us, I guess the strongest thing that my parents taught me is resilience, and to have faith, and to hold. And I actually think my time in Treaty 7, my time living and singing with the Bloods. And so if we go to page, I was thinking, what was I going to talk about? So I'm going to go to page 56 here. And that's late Evelyn Eagle speaker there on the left. And dancing, she danced for a really long time. And so um, in the schedule, Jenny, oh, yeah,
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 there, can you see it?
there's yep. And then on the other side is Sunny Mosquito. And that was at Lethbridge Powwow. I went there. Um, I don't know if Ruth is online here, but quite a few her pictures are here, and quite a few pictures are from uh, Gaina Indian days. So on the schedule, Jenny, what time do we start Q&A?
We should start actually 10:40. So actually right now, in a minute.
That's what I thought.
We need to be done by we need to be done by 12:45.
Okay, so we're going to go into Q&A right now, but before I go into that, um, Jenny and I had talked about doing an informal book signing. I'm in Lethbridge tomorrow. My sister lives there. She just moved there, so I haven't seen her new house yet. So I'm going down to Lethbridge, and when we're done, just between Jenny and I was saying I'd come by the afternoon sometime. Is there still a food truck? The real reason I'm calling.
No, we
What?
have, yeah, I know. We have had to cancel all in-person outdoor. The whole event is actually not happening outside tomorrow. So no food trucks. We're sad.
Okay. All right.
So I don't know if you want to rearrange your plans, but
okay.
yeah, but we can talk after.
Okay, we'll talk after. So Q&A,
Yeah.
do you have some questions from?
Well, I don't at this moment. Does anybody have, feel free to type a question. I don't see any yet, so we can keep going. Why don't you keep talking, Karen? If a question comes, I will just interrupt, okay?
Okay, all right. So one of the questions that Jenny had asked me is about writing for children or something to that effect. I learned English from non-English speakers or people, my parents, my mom didn't learn until she was 11, and my dad probably the same thing. So English was not always a big thing. And then I got pregnant in high school, not once, but twice. So I ended up dropping out of high school and I don't even have grade 11 English. But I struggled and I plodded along in my life. But I've always enjoyed storytelling and speaking, and I've been presenting for about 50 years now. So one year, I had this jingle dress story that happened at Lake of the Woods about how the dress came to be, and the Bajamajik Theater Company on Manitoulin Island um, produced it. I directed it, I choreographed it, and many people said, "Karen, you should write that story." And I had already been writing for some newspapers and some magazines, just narratives, talking about our culture. And then my lack of confidence made me go and get an English literature degree. So I went and I often say that I gave physical birth to three beautiful children. Um, but doing an English degree was one of the hardest things in my life that I did. So I did an English degree, and I did this book here, which is it's called The Promise to the Nokomis, and it's about the transfer of the Anishinaabe dance to the next generation. It's about the jingle dress, and if you go to goodminds.com, I think you can order it there. But it's a story about the jingle dress. So two questions, comments. Did they come? Any questions come up?
Yeah, I've got a comment from Michelle, and she says it's not a question, but a compliment. I love your book, and I'm thrilled that it is on the 2022 Rocky Mountain Book Award list, which
Yes.
all over Alberta will be encouraged to read your amazing, important book and capital letters with 3 exclamation marks. She writes, "Yay!"
Thank you, Michelle.
And yeah,
Michelle,
and
what's her last name? Do I know her?
Dimnick.
Oh, okay. No, I don't know her.
Well, you will get to know her. Thank you, Michelle. And then from Betty Jane. I don't have a question, but a huge thank you. I was a social worker in the 60s and still struggle with my role in the scoop. So I keep listening to the stories and asking for forgiveness.
Mm.
Thank you, Betty. That's it.
I just did okay. I just did by Barb Thomas. It's an old article, I think 20. It's out of this book talking about identity, and it's called Letters to My Daughter. If you could write this in the chat, Jenny.
Oh, okay,
Um,
I will try to do that.
Barb Thomas, Letters to My Daughter,
Okay.
and the book is from 2001. But basically, she's a settler society person, and her children were wondering her children who are settler descendants. There was a black children's club it was in Ottawa, and the girls were wondering why they couldn't go, and so their mother ended up having a really good discussion about identity. But one of the things that she concludes with is we can't forget be guilty for what happened in the past, but what do we do today to remedy the atrocities that happened? um, my son was at a grocery store in Saskatoon, and my son is I don't know, I don't like to say it this way, but well, if we make a stereotype of Indigenous men, I guess he fits that because he's tall, dark, handsome, and has long braids. That's my stereotype of a First Nations man: tall, dark, handsome with long braids. So that's my son. And he was at the grocery store getting groceries. This is shortly after the announcement of the Kamloops child graves. And he said there was a lineup in front, and he's an iron worker. He's a young man. Um, he's a grass dancer. Well, I wonder where he is. Let's see. Try to find a picture while I'm telling this story.
I will just read one more compliment, okay, while you're finding
Okay.
from Kathleen. You are a wonderful inspiration to all. I thank you for speaking to us. I am sorry to say that I am in your age group and really just learned about the 60s scoop and residential schools in the last few years.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you, Murray Sinclair, who is the former Senate member of the Canadian government, and he was a co-chair of the TRC. Last year, in an interview, he said, the Canadian school system perpetuates white supremacy. So for those of you that say, you didn't know, that is the school system. And with the current premier changing the curriculum as it is, there's a lot of angst about the way it is, because we put a lot of work as educators changing the curriculum to recognize truth, and now the premier is reversing it and changing it so the truth isn't revealed. And so I would just want to say on page 39 and page 7, that's my son. He's a grass dancer, but anyway, he was lining up at the grocery store, and he said, I felt so awkward. I didn't know what to say or what to do. This cashier just started crying and apologizing for all what happened. And yeah, 39 and then I think 7. Um, he said, I felt so awkward. I didn't know what to say or what to do. And then there was a lineup of, he goes, the lineup of people were there waiting, and she's breaking down and crying. Yeah. So that's my son. So basically, and I've read a lot of academic papers that say it's not our responsibility to mend previous governments. So how do we take action? What do we do? And it's way past. My apologies that it took a while to relog on and that, but
We'll have you back again, Karen.
thank you, Jenny.
To
Thank you.
start. Yeah, so I do need to close. We do need
Yes.
Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us. And I will practice 2 years to learn 2 words or more. Linda's been very good. We're learning Blackfoot here. We've got it around the library. So she is teaching us Blackfoot words.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we are learning. But thank you.
Iksugapi, Linda.
Yeah. And thank you to all our participants for coming today. And again, thank you so much, Karen, for taking the time. And we will see you again.
Okay.